Okay, welcome to the call. The stream should be switched over. I will await confirmation from the YouTube chat box that that is successful. Cool. Can I actually get someone else to test their levels? Just anyone say hello?
Hello, hello.
Okay, perfect. Levels look good. Okay, let's get started. Everyone should have the agenda. It's issue 55. Sharing it in the chat right here. We will get started with some testing updates, as usual. Prismatic found, I think Terrence found an issue where the calculation in slashing was, due to the way it was formatted, was overflowing, potentially overflowing, and I think in a test or two, overflowing the uint64. I have a few relatively non-substantive changes, some fixes in documentation and things in V08X branch that includes a fix to this that just kind of alters the way the computation is happening. So that's non-substantive but doesn't overflow. This one seems relatively important to get out, so I think I'm going to get out this V08X within the next few days, which has some of the other minor things that people have found. So that'll fix maybe that testing issue if anyone else has run into it. Let's see. Proto, do you have any updates for us?
No real updates. It's just spec freeze is over now, so we get to build more and focus less on this, on like the run up to the spec. Now I can actually build, so it's great.
Agreed. Great. Yeah, there's I'm sure even after the freeze, we're going to be expanding coverage of the tests as needed as we find some stuff that we want to add. Cool. And any update on fuzzing?
So the goal here is to try and provide basic fuzzing infrastructure for all the clients, so that client implementers don't have to worry too much about being compliant with the state transition function, and you can spend most of your time on, what makes a client, I guess, like networking, databases, and whatnot. So we've started with PySpec and the Go executable specs, and I think the next target for integration will be Lighthouse, but hopefully a lot of the infrastructure will be generic for all the clients. So I guess that might come in the next 2 weeks, hopefully.
Cool. Yeah, we'll, I guess, get the experiment run with one and then learn some things and tie everyone else in. Great. Cool. Any other testing things before we move on?
For fuzzing, we are fuzzing 0.8, and the Go executable spec is almost up to date now. The PySpec already is, and then it's really up to like the last, like the first client to also be on the same spec version. You can start fuzzing.
About the fuzzing, how do you drive it?
Yeah. Hello.
Like, how is the fuzzing driven? What's the input?
So the problem with fuzzing is that we have two kinds of inputs. We have a state and we have blocks. And the state itself is really easily randomized. It contains cryptographic content. It has all these validity assumptions since you only build on a valid state. Whereas with blocks, you can have any kind of block, right? So these are like the attack vector, you could say. So we're fuzzing blocks now, and we are extending second corpora of the pre-state, but then only when there's a valid post-state we extend this corpora. So generally you could say we're mostly focusing on blocks now. But we are looking to make this extension of the the states more intelligent, so that you could actually make more progress in more like a chain test where you have more different pre-states being fuzzed.
So what's the difference between that and the YAML file?
YAML files are particularly constructed tests. So given a pre-state and given some input that we want to hit certain conditions, certain bounds, so maybe a normal path, or maybe testing right on the boundary or testing right past the boundary. So they're like particularly constructed tests, something that you might write in your own test suite. Whereas these are taking pre-states and modifying blocks generally at random within some sort of bounds and just applying them to test things that we weren't necessarily thinking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the EF one works, but I know May's explained how our one works. And you start with a like a valid block or some valid object that kind of reaches as far into the code path as it can. Then the fuzzer meters all your code, and then it randomizes the fields of the original object you gave it, and then detects if it explores new code paths and kind of smartly tries to expand itself out to cover as much code as it can by like randomly modifying deterministically, but somewhat randomly modifying the object, and then learning about how that affected the coverage.
Okay, yeah, because the fuzzing that Proto outline seemed like it didn't check the bit patterns or the code path that were exercised by the framework.
Yeah, I'm simplifying it a little bit here, but yeah, the randomization of the block is done by libfuzzer, and that checks the coverage and then tries to randomize it as best as it could, just the parts that improve coverage. But again, as in, you don't want to fuzz only one pre-state, so it's more complicated than that.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely coverage driven, and there is a randomization aspect.
Cool. Any other questions on this before we move in? Oh, Preston has a question. How does the fuzz harness look? Is it libfuzz or an existing tool compatible?
Hey, I think Proto just answered that. He said that it would be using libfuzz to basically you get the signal feedback. Did you get farther through the test, or was this a worse fuzzing scenario? So that answers my question. Thanks.
Cool.
Right. So I think some people here are already familiar with libfuzzer. We have Guido working on this, who has lots of experience with it and extending it. And so it gets, like what I was saying about these two different kinds of states we're working on. We have the beacon state and the block. And we just don't want to evolve only the block input. Because if you're always fuzzing the same state, you don't really get the same coverage as you could if you're fuzzing multiple states. So this is where we're trying to improve on the normal architecture. And then it's somewhat similar to libfuzzer, yes. Since this is what's being used internally.
Cool.
So Guido seemed to suggest that the current approach was good enough at exploring many different paths and finding bugs. I think the main limitation was the speed of PySpec, that you couldn't fuzz that much. It was relatively slow. So hopefully once we do differential fuzzing on the Lighthouse and PySpec, we'll get a bit more content.
Get a lot more performance with the GoSpec and hopefully also with clients. The thing with PySpec is that there's these functions that are not really flattened out. They all inefficiently repeat themselves. We're not pre-computing anything. And now in the next Go update, in GoSpec update, I optimize shuffling, I pre-compute this, pre-compute that. And so we get have almost client speed spec. And I try to keep it as readable as possible.
Right. One of the paths might be to differentially fuzz against the Go spec in the clients, and then if we find issues, to then go back to the Pi spec and make sure that we're in agreement on what the functionality should be. Okay, let's move on from fuzzing. Thank you. We'll keep y'all updated over the coming weeks on that. Cool. So client updates. Let's start with Nimbus.
So we launched our testnet 1 based on Lippy2P daemon this morning. We need to adapt the script because so that it starts with a single command, because the Lippy2P daemon is not built, but it's almost done. So pretty soon, I guess, by the end of the week. We are working towards 0.8. All the small changes were integrated, and right now our big focus is SSE. And we also started to align our state transition function with PySpec in terms of naming. And this is also to improve and facilitate testing. And we had a significant perf improvement during the past week. Accumulated 20 to 30 x speed up on our state transition bench. We identified 3 bottlenecks in process crosslinks, get crosslink deltas. So both combined, we had the 10x speed improvement, and get crosslink committee via caching, we improved by 2x as 2x the speed. So I can put our PR in the chat, so that if people are interested in seeing what we did, they can reproduce. Since we follow the spec naming, it should be very easy to navigate. Now, we also published a metrics library for Prometheus compat metrics. I'm adding the link to the chat as well. And we have EWASM research library, and we are very happy with so we have started a language in NIM, a domain-specific language that compiles to EWASM, and it's quite competitive in terms of contract size. So I'm posting the link as well. And lastly, on Ethereum 1, we had some connections issues that were resolved to parity and Geth. And that's all.
Great, thanks. Congrats on the 30x speed up. Cool. Let's move on to Artemis.
So we've updated to the, especially with SSE, and we've been also thinking a lot about attester slashings and computational requirements for the worst case scenario, and also like we kind of see the need to investigate the network load, from the attestations, decide what strategy to use when aggregating. So that's just kind of the stuff we've been thinking about while working on the update. That's pretty much it.
Great, thanks. Cool. Let's move on to Trinity.
Hello. So regarding SpecSync, PySSE has been synced to the version 0.8, and the state transition update is ongoing. I think it's almost there, thanks to Alex. And for the networking side, we're integrating with the PyLib P2P library, and we found some required issues that we need to fix on the upstream library. And also we are fixing some interoperability requirements, and there is a insecure connections spec I'm posting here. And I think Kevin and maybe Raul, we will introduce it in the networking section. I mean, after the client updates. That's the Trinity side. Thank you.
Thanks. How about Yeast?
Hey, so I was doing some stuff with like the interop guys last week. I started helping out a bit on Artemis, but handed that off again. So now I'm back on updating Geeth to the latest spec version.
Cool. Thanks. Harmony.
Yeah, we've been pretty much worked on an update to 0.8 spec. We're almost there, but SSZ part is still in work in progress. Also, we started to work on a slot clock mechanism, which is based on network adjusted time proposed by Vitalik. I have a PR so far with basic implementation of that proposal. Going to take more time on that. Also, we have started a small research to investigate station aggregation strategies. The goal is to evaluate approach that doesn't involve building additional overlays like handle tree, and working on minimal LibP2P for GVMs. Worked on multi-stream implementation recently. That's all from our side.
Great. Thank you. Glad to hear there's the progress on the JVM piece moving forward. Lighthouse.
Hey all. So same as everybody else, we're progressing with updating Lighthouse to version 0.8, which involves we have to reoptimize our tree hash caching to include for more padding nodes, which is what we've recently been doing. We're also defining more extensive HTTP APIs, which is working to improve dev experience. Matt from Consensus or Quilt is building out some SSZ partials into our code base, which is good. We've also slowly been testing out our initial version of Discovery v5 in small testnets, which also seems to be working. Hasn't had too many issues so far. And we've been working towards standardizing like a kind of a minimal or final libp2p specification for clients that are using libp2p. And in doing so, we've had to update our RPC. In particular, there's been discussion about for the RPC to be using separate protocols, separate protocol IDs per request. And there's a PR, which I'll link, where we're trying to come together to standardize the basic libp2p implementation. That's it from us.
Great. How about Prismatic?
Hey guys, we are caught up to v0.8. We are passing all the spec tests, just figuring out some final things with the Genesis trigger. One thing that we did want to bring up is that we noticed that there's a lack of coverage for some cases across the spec tests. So for example, we passed all the SSE spec tests, but then we were pretty surprised when we saw that SSE failed in some of the block sanity tests. The reason was because the way Python converts the length for the mix-in length into bytes kind of did not cover longer types of lengths. So, like for example, if you try to the way we were encoding the length in Go, like there was a list of validators that was 512 in length. When we encoded that in Go, it gave us a different mixed-in length than we did in Python due to some edge cases and putting variants. So yeah, so we were just pretty surprised at that. I think just like having a little bit more coverage for like longer longer based lists could be good in SSZ. But that was just one thing. Yeah, aside from that, we're getting ready to just start optimizing Prism and working on code improvements, mutation testing, and just more robust improvements to the client. But yeah, we're pretty much caught up on the latest stuff.
Nice, congrats. Yeah, I mean, if you do find some lacking in the test, please report it and or add tests. I definitely I see how that could happen. The actual specification and test for the specification got a lot of love, and maybe not on some of the peripheral testing. But thanks for finding that. Cool. Lodestar.
Hey. So yeah, like everyone else, we're just like trying to upgrade to 0.8. We've began starting, now that things are kind of like more stable, we're starting to actually build out a lot of our dev tooling stuff. So we're separating out our types exclusively so that like in the JavaScript world, you could go and actually import like Eth2 types into a like React project or whatever down in the future. And that'll also help with like our providers and stuff like that, like a Web3.js style provider. SSZ is almost up to date. We have a branch working. We're just kind of like ironing out some bugs that we were working with Proto and Prism with. And we should have that up to date on simpleserialize.com so that you guys can like test it out online. And we're working towards ensuring that BLS works properly in browser as well. Although we've been running into some like peculiar issues, and we'll keep you guys posted if we find anything. We're also working on trying to get the using Harumi again, so that we can have some diversity in BLS. In regards to the client though, we're comfortable now to start actually doing block production. So as soon as we finish our upgrade to 8, we'll actually start doing our testnet, so that we can actually see kind of how that will play out. And then getting it ready so that it can work in browser, so we can have an in-browser natively written one. And then on the side, we also have a bunch of assembly script. We're picking up now that we've frozen again. We're also going back into assembly script and getting a bunch of natively written code so we can execute WASM in some sections. So we're going to try and see how that will speed up some of the shuffling and whatnot, and also so we can convert SSZ into purely assembly script, so that we'll have natively in WASM and see how that increases speed in the browser as well. So just a lot of focus on kind of like getting ready to do dev tooling, and yeah, it's kind of where we're at.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. Parody.
Oh, also Nim, we're going after you guys on the ERC20 contract, the WASM one. We'll get you.
Challenge accepted.
What do you mean exactly there?
There's a little game of WASM golf going on with ERC20 as a smart contract. Yeah.
Cool.
Are you guys gonna cheat and use assembly script, or are you going?
Cool. Okay, Parody.
So we finished a demarketization library last week, which we hopefully want to extend that into a full tree caching library, but there are still a few missing pieces there. And we are trying to update to the 0.8 spec. The issue we had was in the SSD, which I think is a quite substantial change for us. It's not that the algorithm changed out big, but it's that now there are a lot more types in the specification that requires configurable parameters, which we wasn't expect because we were using dynamic config, and that most likely won't work for us right now. So we need to change all the config structs to static type. So we have all the type information at compile time. So that's what we're working on, basically quite large refactoring of the code base. So yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks. Did I miss anyone? I think that's it. Great. Okay, now we have some time for research updates.
And one thing that go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to start talking about phase one stuff. So if your thing is faster, maybe start.
Go ahead.
So things on the research side, there's lists of to-dos for proof of custody and for shard blocks. None of them are that long. Probably the big things are, well, one is that we discovered that that our approach to light clients that involved like fiat smearing and active index roots didn't particularly make sense, and there was like and there's an approach that's even simpler, which is basically to just sign over the committee's root and then um, allow clients to just verify the committee's root directly without doing any of the fiat shamir stuff. So that's nice because it can simplify and reduce the cost of the like client protocol quite a bit. But there's still some decisions to make around like basically what the committees are for each individual slot and how those committees change, and like some of the trade-offs there between like basically the properties of light clients and properties of full clients and like different kinds of efficiency and safety properties. But in general, like the thing that we would needs to do is to just, I mean, in phase zero, including in the blocks a root of the persist crosslink committees is probably fine, and then in phase one, just including a root of the persistent committees, and then we get these nice, really efficient light clients that, I mean, even in the worst case, are only slightly less efficient in terms of bytes per second than Bitcoin block headers are, and in the best case are much more efficient. So that's been like so some good news on that front. There's still just parameters to decide. Otherwise, figuring out the exact structure of data in crosslinks and like basically the trade-off between packing the data tightly versus putting the data for each of the block headers into a consistent position. And recently, I'm actually leaning towards just basically packing the data tightly, which would require basically just taking the data for each block header in each block and just putting them beside each other. So that's something that I have a PR out for, but like it's one of the possible approaches. But it's also not the only approach. So that's the other thing. Otherwise, there's not not too much to do on the shard block side. I also have a PR where, I mean, among other things, the thing it does is it switches from multiple attestations and a proposer signature to just having one signature that includes the proposer and the attestations. So uh, that's there as as an option as well. But generally, I don't think I'm not seeing any unexpected difficulties at all on the phase one side. It's I'd say continuing to look better and better in many ways. Yeah. On the phase two side, there's less not much progress from myself, though, and at this point there's these, well, one of the bigger kind of issues and trade-offs to think about is still how fee markets would work. So, and if anyone's in the channel, still be interested, or need research threads, it'd still be good to get more feedback on that. The Plasma people are going to release a post on OVM very soon, which should be nice. I think those are the main things.
Cool, thanks. Justin?
I mean, one thing to add on phase one is that we're likely to have some cryptanalysis done. In particular, we might have Dmitry Kovratovic do an analysis of the cryptography that's used there. So one of the primitives that we're using is called the Lejeune symbol, and we're using it as a PRF, and it looks fine in various ways, and there's various security mechanisms that we can put in place, but it would still be good to have it audited, because it's an assumption which is not necessarily used in production right now. I guess one of the things that the research team is also doing in parallel to phase one and phase two is more education about phase zero. So various people have made educational documents. I'm working on one as well. And on July 15th at 1 p.m. GMT, there will be a second Eth2 AMA. So that would be a great opportunity to ask questions and maybe also answer questions that are related to your implementation work. Yeah, I mean, and generally now, now that the spec is frozen, if you have questions about the design, feel free to just reach out. I mean, I'm, for example, Justin Drake on Telegram, and more than happy to answer your questions at any time.
Thanks, Justin. Any updates from either, I'm not sure if we have any of the WASM guys, but Quilt?
Yeah, for sure. So we've been doing continuing work, or Matt's been doing continuing work on implementing SSD partials. One of the things we talked about this in the last call is we are kicking off basically a prototyped phase one implementation, so we can kind of bind together the work around Scout and some of the work the EWASM team has done, and that we've collabed on to have this phase 1, 2, and 2 testnet, so we can, I guess, kind of rally people around testing or having something more tangible to test various execution environments and other assumptions. So because in general the Scout code base is in Rust, and we've been Rust focused, we'll be going ahead and building that off of the work that Lighthouse has done. And so we'll kind of go ahead and expand on that to build the prototype. So we are kicking that off this next week. Also, we started diving into some research that's connected to Vitalik's post on state schemes. And I think we've found a pretty novel or interesting idea of how to iterate on that, and how to kind of build this on-chain multi-shard state scheme that can support generalized contracts. And so and this all follows kind of the delayed state execution model. So we're pretty excited about that. We posted kind of a first half on ETH Research yesterday, and then we'll be posting the second half and the applicability to state schemes and ETH2 and multi-shard behavior and what that can open up. So we're definitely looking forward to hearing feedback from people on this, as there's some pretty cool applications there. The fee market stuff, we didn't continue diving as deep into it this last couple weeks. We've been in transition, but that should we should be able to look into that again these coming weeks. Other thing, our team's growing, so we've had John Adler. He's on the call. He's collabing with us now and join the crew. And we're, I guess, trying to grow 4 Rust-based researchers as well. And so we're trying to kind of do more research projects on phase 1, phase 2, more phase 2 focused in parallel, and try and expand a lot of this. So yeah.
Cool. Exciting stuff. Thank you. Any questions for Will before we move on? Great. Cool. Any updates on the Pegasus research team?
Not really. We continue to work on rollups. And, we're just working on it, so nothing new yet.
Okay, great. Any other research updates before we move on?
So we have this formalization in K. So in the K framework, which is directly based on the specification. We've done the migration to 0.8, and what we are trying to do at the moment is have something that is meaningfully testable, at least at this stage, and then going from there. There is also there's also an abstract model of the specification, but that's a lower priority type of development at the moment. But we believe that this is going to be helpful also in the future. So.
Great, yeah, thanks. Musab is with the runtime verification team working on the K model duplicate chain. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Otherwise, would have given you a chance. Yeah, so the intention is to build out this formal model and then utilize it to verify various properties about the specification further down the line. Thank you. Any other research updates? Great. Okay, moving on to networking side of things. I think we have probably some libp updates and maybe some further discussion from Adrian. Let's start with libp.
Yeah, okay. Hey, so we do have a couple of updates. So first, just on the grants front, the grant that we're making to Harmony for the minimal JVM libp2p that was mentioned earlier, that should be finalized like Monday. So that one's in good shape. Then on JS libp2p, there was, I want to ask this group a question. About 6 weeks ago, there was some discussion on this call about JS libp2p specifically not being quote unquote production ready. And so what we did was we went to the Chainflow folks who are working most closely. I'm sorry, ChainSafe. I have a different chain company on my brain. Yeah, we went to the ChainSafe folks who are working most closely with JS libp2p and asked them, hey, what would you do to make this production ready? And so they put together a proposal that is primarily about switching to type-safe, JavaScript to TypeScript, and also some improvements to the documentation and examples. And what I wanted to check with the folks on this call is, were there any other concerns specifically about JS libp2p that we should be addressing, either us or ChainSafe, and the reason I asked that is I want to make a grant to them to get JSLibP2P to a production ready state, and I just would like to include everything, everything anyone feels is necessary. I will add, JSLibP2P has been in production on IPFS for a couple of years at least. So it's not something that's totally untested, but I do understand that Ethereum might have different requirements. So if there's anyone on this call who has an opinion about that, I would ask that you speak up, or or we can take it offline. But is there anyone besides ChainSafe who has views on JSLibP2P production readiness?
I'm not certain many other people have taken that much of a look, but obviously if you have, please speak up. Otherwise, you can find Mike on Telegram to talk about it.
Yeah, if you want to follow up with me, my name is just Mike Gelzer, just one word on Telegram. I'm in there's like a ETH2 libp2p shared channel. I'm in that one. Yeah, so if anybody else has concerns about libp2p, JS libp2p specifically, yeah, just bring that up with me. And then I guess the last thing is we're working with I think we'll probably say more about this on the next call, but we're working with the Ethereum community to answer some questions about what is Protocol Labs relationship to libp2p, and just some questions about the project in general, sort of provide greater transparency. I think we haven't done a great job of that, not because we're actively trying to hide anything, but more out of neglect. So I think that process is playing out right now, and when we have written answers to all the questions, we'll make it public to share it with the whole community. But so you'll probably hear about that next call, but that's going on right now. Raul, did you want to add anything?
No, I think there was a question about the insecure transport, which is now being used that I think Xiaowei mentioned earlier that we should address in this block of the call. So I'll just go for it. We spec the insecure transport. There was a bug that didn't allow the receiver end of the connection to know about the peer ID that was establishing a connection to them. Therefore, some things were failing in Go libp2p, which made it difficult to produce interoperability tests with Go libp2p using the insecure transport. So when you want to remove SegIO or TLS 1.3 or the encryption channel out of the question and just test, whether your multiplexing is working, then this is a good approach to do so. So we are hopefully between today and tomorrow, we'll be adjusting Go libp2p to adhere to the new spec that was written and approved and merged a few days ago. So hopefully that will unblock any interoperability testing that are pending due to this issue.
Hey, Mike. So you mentioned you said there were some concerns about libp2p not being production ready, and so you're saying it's not production ready because it's been working on IPFS for a while. Is that in its same form?
That was specifically of JavaScript. There was
yeah.
Is that in the same form? Sorry, explain what do you mean?
Was it broken out of libp2p and made into JS? Sorry, was it broken out of JS IPFS and made into libp2p, or was that? What was the flow of that?
Yeah. Sorry, I understand your question now. Yes. So initially, JS libp2p was a part of IPFS. It was specifically broken out into a separate system, separate GitHub org, everything. And but that broken out version, is the one that IPFS builds with now. Or sorry, it's JavaScript, so it doesn't compile, but that's the one that JS IPFS uses today. Both the Node version and the in-browser JavaScript version.
Okay, right on. I was just curious about the history. I thought I'd remembered that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, you remembered it right. Yeah, the history of all IPFS implementations, the history of all that start out in IPFS are JS libp2p and Go libp2p, but were both broken out of their respective IPFS implementations. Then the third implementation was the Rust implementation that was written from scratch by Parity, and then every subsequent language implementation, like all the other ones you hear about on this call, are being developed from scratch. But they're all based on the same set of principles and interfaces and abstractions that Go libp2p and JS libp2p use.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have another quick question. What is the current state of the spec? Because I'm probably going to have to start implementing it if I want my clients to be able to talk to other clients. Last time I looked at it, it was kind of like not that great. So I've been working off the Go version, which is also seemingly like going through a refactoring. What are the states on those two things?
Yeah, I think, well, so I'll give my take on it, and Raul might be able to fill in some more specific details. Yeah, we're definitely, we would like for libp2p to be a spec first project, and so we have one docs writer, and he's going through and opening PRs on the specs repo, which is just libp2p/specs, to define the correct behavior based on what's happening in the Go implementation for different parts of the system. That effort is not complete yet, but it has, he's making progress. In the meantime, what we've been recommending to people is to refer to the Go implementation, which we consider as sort of the reference implementation. So then you're asking, okay, but that seems to be undergoing a lot of refactors. I'll let Raul speak to this, but the only major refactor I know about was called the core refactor, where we pulled out a bunch of interfaces into their own repo, and that actually didn't change anything in the wire protocol. So it just makes the code a little easier to understand. Let me turn it over to Raul, though he might.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's actually correct. So there are going to be further changes to libp2p. All of those, as like there are basically suggestions to bring in, different constructs and different approaches to do connection management, to handle the PS store and other things. Those are going to be spec first. So you should not any longer expect for an implementation to change under your feet any longer without there being a spec upfront. We are being very strict about this. So things like, for example, as I said, connection management, peer store, these are things that are first being discussed as spec work, right? So this situation where you see yourself, where you need to follow the lead of a particular implementation should not happen any longer. The core refactor itself was, as Mike said, restructuring of code, but the principles and the concepts and in general, the relationships between the different components of libp2p remain the same. Then right now in just one repo instead of 15 repos. So this makes life much easier, removes a lot of friction for people approaching libp2p like you, Dean, and so on. There are a number of specs so there is this process by which we draw a line in the sand. We say everything that we're going to do from now onwards is going to be spec first. But of course, we need to look back from that line in the sand as well and bring up everything that has been done so far up to the level of specing that we're imposing ourselves now. And this work is in progress. And this is what Youssef is working on, the person that Mike referred to. Go through the libp2p specs repo, you'll see there's a lot of updates there. There's now an index. Specs are much more, there's like much more easy to approach in general because there is an index. There's a table of contents, and as well go through the open PRs right now in the specs repo, because there's several specs that are being worked on right now that are in one stage or another. We also, a few weeks ago, introduced, because some of these specs were being kind of like arriving to like a stage of a lot of bike shedding and so on, and it was a bit unhealthy. Some specs, remained in kind of like a draft stage for very long. So we introduced and this was because we lacked a process to define specs maturity. So, it was very difficult for somebody to just say, hey, I fully agree or I don't agree with this, when there are different shades of gray, and a spec should be giving room and time to mature as the community sees it, and makes adjustments to it. So this is now, we've merged the specs lifecycle and maturity meta spec. So things are getting much more structured in this department. One spec that I think we haven't made a good job of announcing, because I think it's pretty important, and it unifies a lot of concepts in terms of like how connections are handled, how streams are handled, how the connection upgrade process works, is the one that I'm posting right now on the chat box. I think this one is kind of like a unifying spec that is gonna, tie in a lot of concepts together that you might have seen in other specs. So I definitely suggest that you go through it.
Okay. I kind of still don't understand what the maturity of the current spec is. Also, if you guys are still working on the Go docs, because from my experience from going through the Go code, what ends up happening whenever I debug is I hit some kind of interface, and then I end up playing find the implementation to try and figure out what the libp2p code does. So is the spec at a current state where I can implement off that spec, or do I need to continue going through the Go code repeatedly and keep hitting interfaces without clear documentation and trying to figure out what those implementations do myself?
Yeah, I understand your frustrations. Why don't we do one thing? I definitely like to provide a bit of mentoring here to understand as well what the process is for you from when you start from scratch to implement a new implementation of libp2p. So what I suggest is, it's very difficult to give you a generic answer because our specs are modular and specs are not like a monolithic document or corpus, so to speak. So each spec will have a different maturity behind it, and it should be tagged up front, at the top. So what I suggest is maybe we get in a call offline, and we go through where you are right now, and we establish that channel of communication so we can help you and guide you through the process.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, cool, awesome.
About the unsecured transport, does that basically mean that it's an unencrypted clear text channel?
Yes, totally. Big notice, do not use in production. This is only for testing. It was intended only for testing. And precisely that's why it didn't work in Go libp2p against other clients, against other implementations. It only worked internally. But it is true that, now that we have a more hybrid ecosystem, there are others that are trying to sort of test their inner pieces that they're implementing that come after, the handshake, the security handshake, that do not rely on a secure channel like multiplexing or other protocols or whatever. So there is some value in having a standardized and secure transport, only big notice up front, only for testing purposes.
So basically what you're saying is that assuming that some client doesn't have SecIO implemented yet, then they can start by using this one, which should be more simple.
Exactly. So there's different teams are parallelizing work, and some members are working on SecIO while others are working on MPLEX, for example, and this enables the MPLEX person to test against an insecure version while the other peer is working on SecIO.
Hey guys.
Does it? Sorry, one last question.
Okay.
Does it authenticate, or does it not authenticate either?
It does authenticate the initial connection. So the initial handshake, the connecting peer, so the initiating peer should be having a peer ID for the other end, and the receiving end is exchanging its own peer ID and its public key. So the initiator can actually check that it's them. But then subsequent messages and bytes are not authenticated.
All right, cool. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so I had a question about the JS libp2p. So back to Mike's point about the production readiness of JavaScript libp2p. I believe that Gossip Sub has been implemented by ChainSafe and it's not used by IPFS. Is that correct?
I don't know. Is it used by IPFS, Raul?
Not yet. It's not been integrated in IPFS. No.
Okay, so yeah, that is correct then. Yeah.
Right. So that would be something to ensure it's production ready. Just
yeah, that's a fair point. I understand where you're going. Yeah, I mean there are some features that Ethereum 2 cares about that are, although they're like, you know, part of the system, IPFS isn't really battle testing them. So yeah, the modular nature of the system means that there are some things like that, and I do agree. We need to do some testing on Gossip Sub.
Yeah, and for the record, I think the IPFS team would be super happy to intake Gossip Sub and to add an experimental flag to enable it, just like the Go IPFS project has done, and even conduct interoperability testing out in the wild with IPFS and Gossip Sub enabled on both Go and JS.
Yeah, for transparency, like the main reason I'm hesitant and want to make sure that it's actually in, like we have more people than just us looking at it, is because although I know the light client stuff kind of today kind of might have got blown up a little bit, but as we approach doing light clients, like that's what one of our main focuses, and like I want to make sure that, you know, people can actually have a like Chrome extension light client in their browser, and it's gonna have to rely exclusively on Gossip Sub. So that's like really important. So I do want to know like what steps we can take to make that harden.
Yeah, so there's several things here. First of all, I would definitely start a conversation to integrate your work Gossip Sub into JS IPFS as a medium for shipping it to an actual finished product to the world. Secondly, we are working on a test lab infrastructure that would allow us to deploy different clients at scale and test the interactions between them and measure and so on. So that would be another avenue to conduct this testing. And yeah, then we can even look at, you know, different other projects that are using JS libp2p out there. There are several of them, including MetaMask and so on, that are specifically using PubSub as well, that we could, you know, potentially push, like have a conversation with to integrate Gossip Sub and try to even further test it.
Hey, quick question. I apologize if you said before, I was kind of in and out, but is there a date at which you plan to have the specs kind of, I don't know, finalized, I guess, or to the point where you expect people to implement against them rather than the Go code?
Yeah, actually, we were just having this conversation yesterday, which we don't have a date that we've committed to yet, but we're thinking that we should create one. I mean, you know, define a date. So the answer is we don't know the answer yet, but this was one of the questions that came up with just about project transparency and stuff in general. So now we're thinking about that. So maybe we could update you again next time on what decision we make there.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just put out on the subject of specs for 1 second. The biggest bottleneck for us is actually we need to hire a second specs writer. And so if anybody on this call has anyone you can refer to us who's looking for a job and who does you know, technical and documentation writing, that would be really awesome. That's sort of the biggest.
So Mike, does this need to be higher, or how can we help you as a community to actually get the job done?
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, we definitely would be receptive to PRs. I think people who understand the Go code base well would be the best ones to write specs for it, and the person to contact is if you go in the specs repo, you'll see a guy named Yusuf Napora, YUSEF, and he's the one who is primarily responsible for writing the specs right now. So, if you have some time and want to bite something off, you could ping him on GitHub and ask him, what's a good area to focus on.
So what I'm thinking as well, Mike and Antoine, is that we could potentially create like this pipeline that we have in this sort of like calendar that we've discussed. We can make that public and create kind of like a status matrix where people can see what the status of each element that has been sort of like in the pipeline to spec is and get involved. We should basically create an issue for each of them so that people willing to participate in this effort can really jump in and help.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah,
good.
that's a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're looking to hire. I don't know if a hire is going to work out. I know that Protocol Labs at grants to help kind of implement and develop the ecosystem. So I know for a fact that there's several actors in the Ethereum community would be willing to like put themselves to work on that. So I don't know. Do you want to open some Gitcoin grants or bounties for this? That might actually help speed up the whole thing.
Yeah, we would definitely be open to making grants. Yeah, so far we haven't been using Gitcoin. We would like to. We just haven't had time to yet. But yes, if there are people who are interested in grant-based work on the improving the specs, yeah, we would definitely. You should definitely get in touch with us.
Okay, we have some other things I want to take care of today. If you have, obviously, it's a continued conversation on the P2P, specs, development, etc. Reach out to me, reach out to Raul, reach out to Mike, and we'll keep working on it. I do want to highlight this PR that actually was the combining of two other PRs that Age has up right now. There's already some good conversation on here, but I do want generally, someone from each team that's on the networking side to take a look at this, participate in the conversation, because some of the stuff, it's not majorly important from a certain perspective, but very important to conform on and get people talking. So it's something that we want to get merged relatively soon. We can continue to iterate on it, but we want to kind of get the bones and some of these core directions in place. So please take a look at pull request 1281. There's a good conversation going on right there already, but let's keep it moving. Age, is there anything else you want to say on that before we move on?
Not really. As you said, it's pretty iterative. So ideally, if people can have a look and just put their own opinions, I'm sure people have got their own implementations, which may be difficult to change to what we've written here. So I know that I've had to rewrite a lot of stuff. So if that's the case, just let us know and we can modify it.
Cool.
Do you anticipate that we can use the same discovery for ETH1 and ETH2 at some point?
We're using disk v5 at the moment, and that seems to work. I haven't
the
actually
intention,
made it.
If the question is ETH1 going to be migrating to disk v5, the answer is yes. So the intention is to use the same unified discovery and ENRs across both, when these protocols exist in parallel, across both protocols. Is that the question?
And yeah, that's the question. And basically share the DHT table as well in that case, right? So
yes,
all the nodes will be on the same, table, whatever you want to call it. DHT.
Right. And you're advertising, are you ETH1, are you ETH2, what topics of each, are you like client server, that kind of stuff, to kind of unify discovery of peers across.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I know an update on Discovery v5 is that Felix is, I don't know if there is an engagement, but there's discussions with some people who are going to do an audit of the protocol. He expects probably a little bit of iterative stuff on the actual spec itself after that finishes. And then he's going to, beyond that, probably do conformance testing and things like that. Cool. Any other updates, any other movement on networking things that people want to discuss?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about the effort that took place last week in Toronto, if that's of interest.
Yeah.
So in Toronto last week, we had 3 client teams in the same room. We had Artemis, we had Prismatic Labs, and we had Lodestar sitting in Toronto at the ChainSafe office. Thank you, folks, for hosting. We were able to have an exchange of hellos between Prismatic and Artemis using the simple Hobbits approach. We are kind of learning on that. This is interesting because most of the ugly bits of this has been more on the people and making sure that we communicate and collaborate than the technical side. The technical side itself, given the Hobbits, is not too complex, so we're able to move pretty quick. The next step for us is to take it to the next level with having the ability to gossip bits between the different instances. We're also trying to gauge from the Moloch DAO tester and all the early work that we did into creating this type of test nets. What it would take to create a test bench where we'd be able to really create a Genesis event, make it possible for all the peers to recognize each other, even over static peering is fine for now, and to start having an exchange of blocks and attestations so that we can really make sure that this is working over time. So there are 2 efforts in separate, in parallel. One is to work on that gossiping approach. Right now, the gossip is extremely simple. We just send one message to everyone saying that we have a block and they can ask for it, or we have an attestation and they can ask for it. And on the other side of the test bench, we're working on creating all sorts of utilities and tools so it's possible for the community to run a testnet with the various clients. So there are a number of standardization items around the key store, around making sure that we can all generate the same Genesis event, and then it can work with, for example, a gift node on the local network. They can generate that from a state, from a contract being deployed there. One thing I should note is that at Whiteblock, we have the ability to snapshot the state and so recreate testnets where the state is already snapshotted. So it would actually help move much faster on doing that. So we will use that technology as much as possible to shorten the test cycles. Otherwise, it takes quite a bit to recreate the whole setup every time. You have any questions?
I did want to bring up a point. I think some clients are currently gossiping hashes and then doing RPC calls for retrieval of that data. I believe our assumption right now is that the latency of that is going to be too high in production, and that gossiping full objects is going to be the proper path.
Right. We crippled this to a point where it's very, very simple for the reason of just having interoperability.
Okay,
so
cool.
No way it's going to be the way it behaves at production time. Production time, you might want to use something as good as Gossip Sub or even just Episub, where we have the ability to really tune in the number of eager peers and have propagation in a way that it's impossible to stop from an attacker perspective, the propagation of a message, but also it's much easier on the network. But all this needs to be benchmarked. So having a bad baseline helps us kind of perform from there and create performance enhancements.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and Preston might want to jump in, but it was at Preston's suggestion that we simplified the gossiping mechanism. I think he was saying that the egress or ingress charges were really high on GCP, and that methodology helped cut the cost down or something. Is that right, Preston?
We can't hear you, Preston, if you're talking.
Yeah, sorry, my mic was muted. So I think what you're referring to is when we're doing the announcement messages. So if we've created a new block, we'll announce the hash of it, which is of constant size, and then that gets gossiped through the entire network. And if people hear it redundantly, they're not getting this redundant large data, they're only getting a small piece. So I tell you this new block, and if you want it, you dial back and ask me what the data is. So that's been helping us save some bandwidth there. In terms of keeping it simple, I think that's for the Hobbits implementations. We don't want to take this and get it super complex because it's just to see basic interop. So I was advocating keep that simple as well.
Fair. What I'm saying though is that announcement of identifier and then subsequent request, although it does save bandwidth, I think is going to induce way too high latencies on the network, and that if anything, potentially a high. I mean, because at the beginning, no one knows about it, so you're strictly wasting time. So there potentially is a hybrid strategy where maybe a portion into the slot you're only identify a gossiping identifier, but I don't think that the extreme on the end of strictly a gossiping identifier at the beginning is going to be the proper trade.
So I think I would agree with that for blocks, because those actually have some big urgency, but for attestations it's not as urgent, and you can still get away with broadcasting like a subset of it without having to do the full data. So it's worth looking into, but I agree there's now like a round trip if you're trying to get blocks out there pretty quickly.
And Danny, your suggestion is very similar to the EpiSub or epidemic broadcast trees. Just FYI, that hybrid approach.
Right. And we did, Yannick, do some experimentation on EpiSub a while ago, and what were the findings? Your findings there?
That it didn't really help much, if at all.
Gotcha.
But I think EpiSub is different from what Danny just suggested, because it's not based on timing. So if I understood correctly, Danny wanted to basically send full blocks in the first half of a slot and then only hashes in the second half. Whereas in EpiSub, you just keep track of what information you received from which peer, and then you decide on that what to send to that peer again.
Yeah, but it still has the ability to do the hybrid approach. I mean, it's still a hybrid approach because you have the actual gossiping of the full block if it's an eager peer, and then if it's a lazy peer, you just tell it, hey, I have this, and so it kind of splits the difference. Is my point.
I think it is already in the gossip sub. The I want and I have this thing.
Is it? Because I think it's gossip sub is probabilistic.
Yeah, that was my understanding too.
And also, I don't know that EpiSub is actually implemented. Since we have the lead P2P guys on the call, what's the level of maturity of EpiSub, folks? Do you know?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah.
The level
EpiSub?
of maturity of EpiSub, yes.
EpiSub was, if I recall correctly, was an idea that we want to work on, particularly that's in the pipeline, but it's not necessarily being highly prioritized right now, because if I recall correctly, the trade-off there is that for EpiSub to be the use case where EpiSub is mostly optimal is where you have very stable dissemination patterns in the network. So there are very few producers in the network and a lot of consumers. Therefore, EpiSub, by using the tree and the broadcast trees and so on, you're able to figure out sort of like the best spanning tree across the network to disseminate messages that are coming from a very small set of producers. So in our use cases, we don't really have that pattern. That's why we haven't really prioritized it much. But if this is the case for Eth2.0, then definitely I think it's worth reactivating this particular discussion.
Yeah, I'd be interested if someone has looked into like what would be best for gossiping blocks as opposed to attestations. If we've thought about that, that's a good point, Raul. By the way, as far as the trade-offs.
Sorry, I just want to add that I think the message identifier scheme is already in EpiSub now, and EpiSub is more like you grab and prune the edges, like your peers' connections. So I think it is the different scenario, and I think Yannick has done some pull and push scheme simulation before.
Yeah, that was similar to what Danny suggested, but it also didn't help, but I don't remember why.
So was there a particular reason why you believe that a epidemic broadcast tree approach could be beneficial and fruitful in this message propagation paradigm that you have in ETH 2.0?
No, I don't know. I'll speculate and throw something out there. Maybe gossip sub's better for gossiping blocks, and an episub is better for attestations.
That could.
Wait, sorry. Reverse that. There's episub's better for blocks, and gossip sub maybe that's better for attestations. I mean, speculation. I don't know.
I guess I'm not certain. I know like the beacon chain subnet would probably be more stable over time, whereas these other topics may alter quickly. So there might be a trade-off between what gossiping you're using for shard subnets versus beacon subnet, but I'm not certain.
So maybe if there's like as a way forward to continue discussing this particular topic, if somebody can put together maybe a small blurb on what the differences in message propagation are in these particular circuits, then maybe I can involve somebody from the P2P team, the person that is basically mostly specialized in gossiping, and have a look at potentially if we could have a hybrid router that we could attach specific dissemination routing strategies for one topic and a different routing strategy for a different topic and so on, and somehow arrive at different paths throughout the network.
I have some notes on this that discuss the timing of broadcasts as well as the size, and can add some notes about stability of topics and stuff. I'll pass it on to you.
Perfect. Sounds great.
What I would want to point out here is that all these schemes, they introduce extra opportunities for failures and issues in general. Like the absolutely most simple approach of gossiping full blocks is very, very resilient. It's foolproof, so to speak. And then anything on top of that, any smart things we try to do, and even gossips up over flood sub, I think we should be very careful about motivating that with like some substantial gains, because the simplicity of a normal flooding makes it extremely resilient against all kinds of attacks and so on.
I mean, that's valid. And I think one way to address that, Jacek, is to make sure that whatever gossiping protocol we end up using, we have this baseline where it's always possible to go back to flooding and it works, right? So we should have an adaptable approach where we always start by flooding, and then we can maybe optimize a little bit down the road. But we need to test that. As far as I can tell, when we did some testing of flood sub at Whiteblock, it does not perform in the span of time with the number of bytes which are required for blocks and attestations for the Eth2 protocol. But I might be wrong. I think there's more research needed and more testing needed there. But this is what I think we know at this point.
Yeah, so my understanding was that gossip sub was chosen precisely for this reason, that there were some really substantial improvements in early experiments, at least. Is that right?
Yeah. So let me provide some insight there into like how you make decisions, how one is supposed to make decisions regarding what gossiping pattern to choose and so on. Generally, like it's all a matter of trade-offs. Flood sub is very resilient, as you said, to all kinds of attacks because it's very naive, and the key is simplicity here. So you just broadcast messages to every single peer that you connected to that you believe is interested in that message. However, that introduces a massive amplification factor, so massive write amplification on I/O, which depending on the traffic and the volume and the size of the messages and the latency of the links and a number of things could potentially harm more than it could benefit. But it does provide the security aspects, right? So that is one trade-off. Then as you start like trying to cut down on the amplification factor, because you say, well, you know, if these peers are supposed to be well redundantly connected and indirectly redundantly connected, so to speak. So a particular gossip message might travel through the network and may end up arriving at a particular peer way too many times due to the amplification factor. Then you do want to start getting like more intelligent about how you tell peers, hey, stop sending me this kind of message because I'm already subscribed to that. I'm already receiving it earlier from another peer that I'm subscribed to and potentially has a closer path. So, I mean, and that's when you start becoming more intelligent, because your trade-off there, or your priority, could be to reduce write amplification, right? And overall traffic in the network. So it's definitely a matter of trade-offs. But like, I'm happy to have, you know, to continue having this discussion. There were things about the gossip sub measurements that need to be revisited, as they were testing the wrong things. But this has been already, you know, has come up in different forums. So yeah, the numbers that we have on Gossip Sub are not like particularly realistic in terms of, you know, what they're testing and how they're testing it. So I wouldn't use that as a deciding factor right now, but definitely open to, you know, exploring different approaches and really understanding, drilling down to the requirements to understand if, you know, a hybrid between Gossip Sub and Epi Sub and Flood Sub as like a fallback and so on could be, you know, something that even advances the state of the art in the way that these algorithms could be implemented at scale.
Thank you. Okay, we got to move on. Gossiping is complicated and important, so let's keep working on it. Cool. General spec discussion. The one thing that I know a lot of implementers brought up is SSE. There were a couple of more sophisticated types that were added to SSE, specifically the bitlist and bitvector, that moved some of the low-level validation of bytes out of the spec and into the typing system. This was done, one, to make the spec focus more on spec things and not on low-level byte manipulation and byte validation, and was also done in an effort to potentially provide a valuable set of types in SSE that might be used in other places, such as the application layer. The idea there being, if there is byte level validation and manipulation that you'd want to be doing, why have to repeat the logic in multiple places and instead put it in the type system? That said, there are obviously some pain points and issues there, so I want to open it up for a quick discussion. This is something that we want to figure out if it's going to stay in soon, so that we can fix the spec and move forward if we need to. Doncred, I know you did a lot of work on that. I know you've also facilitated some of the conversation around that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think like clearly we want to be open here to like understand what people's pain points are there. I guess like we didn't do that enough back when we first put this into the spec. But yeah, I mean, like, so yeah, let's start that conversation. I still think that it's a valuable thing to have in the SSD spec. I think it can avoid some errors, but like, of course, we don't want to make life super hard for implementers. So yeah.
Okay. I know there are various opinions on this. Doncred, is there still an open issue discussing this?
I think at the moment the issue is closed. I think Preston opened an issue and was kind of okay with our discussion in the end. But of course, like if people have opinions on this, then they can still reopen this and add it again. I can post it.
Okay. If there is, Preston, are you not muted? You look unmuted. Are you talking?
No, sorry.
Okay,
sorry.
got no problem, no problem. Just want to make sure. This is something that I don't want to leave hanging. So if there is continued conversation that needs to be had, let's have it over the next 7 days in an issue. So if someone still feels fired up about this, still feels that it should be changed, please make a new issue and we'll discuss it there. Otherwise, this is very critical for getting in line with consensus tests, so I don't want to leave this hanging for too long. Preston just posted the original discussion. We can either reopen that issue if somebody wants to, or we can make a new issue. But again, let's keep the conversation. Let's make the conversation happen in the next 7 days.
Just as a comment, the more types we have defined in the SSD spec, the more efficient our code, at least in NIM, can be in terms of both code size and performance, because we don't have to check out, we have much less to check, and we can directly insert the proper deserializing code in our code base.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. Is there any questions?
About
Yeah,
SSC, there's this minor thing where we can have fixed size empty containers and empty vectors, which are kind of troublesome. And I know we don't really have them currently in the spec. I just wanted to address it so that the SSC spec can be complete. What do clients like best? Do we want to make empty vectors illegal, or do we want to make lists containing them illegal? Is there a use case for empty fixed size containers?
We already made them illegal, right? So this is basically revisiting that decision.
We made vectors illegal, but we also have containers, and then there is this inconsistency between
I see.
lists
So we
being 0 and vectors not being 0. So we just want to get this right, and then we can move on.
So I think the problem just came. So before, containers and empty containers, empty vectors, they're both illegal. And now we added this new thing that lists actually have a limited size. And suddenly we have the question, can that size be 0? And it actually doesn't cause the same problems as it does for vectors or containers, because it would still be a variable size type. So all the information would still be needed. The question is just, is it kind of weird that we like forbid one thing and not the other? Like, yeah, it looks a bit weird to me. But yeah, like there are different ways to resolve this, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay forbidding or not forbidding lists with 0 max length.
It's
like
just
the only question why we want to forbid it is because it might give us some easy way to like kind of in quotation mark comment out some features in the spec by setting some max lengths to 0.
What I wanted to say, we already discussed this in this issue, but I do want to bring it up. And if any implementers have like opinions here, or that see sometime in the future where we would need this kind of type, then please do join the issue on the specs repository and we can discuss. Otherwise, I think it's just like not too important.
Yeah, cool. Let's move on. We're at the hour and a half. Any other things before we close today?
For the interop, I just want to say like the invitations went out to team leads, and it's that those invitations are good until like the 14th. And for the Antoines on the call, that's Bastille Day. So like after that, we're going to kind of reshuffle and send out more invitations to some of the teams that are wanting to attend. So make sure that you register. There are a bunch of teams that still haven't registered. Prism. I can't remember if Chain Safe or not. But yeah, so like, please do register in the next 3 days.
Cool. It's easy and free to register. Great. Anything else before we close? Okay. Thank you. A lot of really good discussions. I appreciate everyone attending. We will likely meet in 2 weeks. You need to take a look at the calendar first. Thanks. Have a good one, guys. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.